There is a truth folded into Matthew 6 that overturns the way many of us think about religion. It insists that what matters most is what no one sees. On a sun-washed slope outside a Galilean town, with dust in the air and the sea lying like a pale band on the horizon, Jesus spoke not to instruct a ritual, but to pull the soul away from theater and back into the secrecy of the Father's house. They came from the lanes and the courts, from the terraces of houses and the market stalls. Some came because they hoped to hear a word that would make them safer under Roman rule. Some came because the teachers were a pattern for life. Pharisees and scribes stood at the edges like men wearing heavy robes in summer, proud, careful of posture, eyes taught to be seen. The crowd pressed in, fishermen with sunburned faces, women with the faint scent of olive oil in their hair, merchants with a coin purse tied at the belt. A wind moved across the hillside, carrying the smell of figs and the distant bray of a donkey. Jesus sat, the carpenter's hands folded. He did not speak to parade power, but to expose the heart. He began by looking long at the people, and the words that came were simple and cutting. He put the spectacle beside the secret. He named a religious habit everyone knew: giving, the offering placed before God. In the streets and at the gates, there were those who made their alms into a play. They would stand where men could see, throw coins into the chest with a sound like blessing, and take the noise of human praise as their reward. It was a public art of righteousness, sound and show, trumpet and posture. Think of a man making show of his gift so that others might clap. Think of the sound of coins against wood like applause. The shock of Jesus was not that giving should stop. It was that giving was being turned into a stage. He named the remedy with a parable of the hands. Let not the left know what the right does. Close the door, he said. Step into the inner room where only the Father stands as witness. He promised a reward that is unlike applause. The Father who sees in secret will repay. That is the first uncompromising claim of the chapter. Your Father values the hidden act more than the public one. You must hear the sting here. Religion that seeks men's eyes is a counterfeit faith. When you give so that men will say you are generous, you exchange God for reputation. The currency of the kingdom is not applause, but obedience. It is not the public ledger, but the heavenly account. If you are hungry for praise, you will never be full. Secret giving shapes a heart that learns to trust God rather than applause. It trains the soul to give when no one can tally it, and to depend on the God who does not post updates, but records deeds in heaven. From giving, Jesus moved to prayer. He named another theater, the platform of prayer. Those who make long displays with faces turned outwards, phrases repeated for effect. They loved words as ornaments. To us, to the disciples who had watched the posture of the pious, one of them lifted his voice. Teacher, teach us to pray. It is a small, human plea, curiosity in the midst of a larger crowd. Jesus sat and offered a pattern, not a magic formula, but a hinge by which a life might turn toward the Father. He taught them to pray as children speak to a father, to begin by honoring the Father's name, to ask that the Father's reign come, to ask for daily bread, for the forgiveness that binds community, and for strength against temptation and harm. The Lord's Prayer in his mouth was a map, relationship before request, kingdom before convenience, forgiveness as necessary to receiving forgiveness, and dependence rather than self-sufficiency as the posture of the soul. Here the order: Father, kingdom, bread, forgiveness, guarding. It is economy of prayer that puts God's will before personal comfort. Jesus did not give a liturgy to be uttered as incantation, but a grammar by which prayer breathes. He then returned to the old warning: do not heap public phrases as if they win you favor with God. Pray in the hidden place, shut the door, speak to the one who hears where no crowd applauds. The Father who sees in secret will answer in ways unseen by human eyes. There is tenderness here. Jesus knew that prayer could become workmanlike, even commercial, names traded for favors. So he placed before them the face of a father. You who pray must let this Father be the center, not the noise of your own voice. When you ask for bread, you ask as a child asks a parent, not as a beggar arranges a show. When you ask for forgiveness, you prepare your own heart to forgive. The pattern is not about words, but about a reoriented life. Humility, dependence, and openness to God's kingdom. Then he spoke of fasting. He remembered the long faces, the disfigured look some wore to show sacrifice. Fasting had become another mask. Those who would look sorrowful in the square took pride in their pale cheeks as proof of piety. Jesus told them plainly, when you fast, do not look like you do. Anoint your head, wash your face, present nothing that advertises to the crowd. Fast as one who is hidden from view, as one addressing the Father alone. Again, the Father rewards what is hidden. Pause with that image of the closed door. There is a room in every life that is private and sacred. It is here that the Father sees light crossing the floor, the smell of oil, the hush of a person on their knees. If your religion cannot be practiced there, where no one can applaud it, then it is not yet true devotion. Secret devotion weakens the root of performance. It pulls the anchor inward. Across each of these teachings runs a single accusation. The theater of religion corrupts faith. The Pharisees had mastered the stage: trumpets, mournful faces, long prayers, and many admired them. But admiration is a poor soil for a life that must be given to God. Admiration often binds the heart to men rather than to the Father. Jesus wanted something else, a faith that breathes behind a closed door, that opens the hand while the world is unaware, that bows before God in honesty rather than posture. The sermon then closed in on the heart's vision, where treasure lies and where the eye leads. Jesus gathered images simple to a peasant and cutting to the proud. Treasure stored in earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in, or treasure held in heaven where it endures. He did not give advice about investment returns. He spoke about allegiance. Where you place your treasure is where your heart will be found. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. If your eye is bad, your body will be full of darkness. The metaphor is visual, immediate. What you fix your gaze upon shapes what you become. A soul that looks on earthly wealth will contract, sharpen, harden. A soul that fixes upon the kingdom will widen, open, become generous. Then the stark word came. You cannot serve two masters. You will either owe yourself to God or to Mammon. You cannot split the allegiance. The sentence lands like a hammer. Choice, not compromise. Mammon is not merely money. It is the spirit of ordering life around gain, security, and reputation. To serve God is to order life around dependence, righteousness, and the kingdom. The two pull in opposite directions. You cannot bow to both. Listen to how this connects. Public giving, public prayer, public fasting, they are all ways of measuring success by what men see. Treasure on earth trains the eye to measure life the same way. The entire system leads to worry. Worry about what you will eat, what you will wear, how you will be regarded. So Jesus turned to the last great commission of the sermon. Do not worry. He told them to watch the birds. The wild birds neither sow nor reap. They have no storehouse, yet the Father feeds them. He asked them to consider the lilies. They do not toil or spin, yet Solomon in all his splendor was not arrayed like one of these. These natural images were not quaint. They struck at the heart of daily anxiety. To live under God's rule is to learn the grammar of provision. God cares for the created. How much more will He care for you? But He did not romanticize poverty. He spoke plainly. Seek first the kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. The command is not a promise of effortless wealth. It is an orientation. When your primary labor is for the reign of God, when your hands are busy making justice, mercy, and faithfulness, then the anxious measuring of days loosens its grip. You will still plan, sow, and work. You will still be prudent, but your heart will not be captive to worry, because your trust will be set on the One who orders creation. This is the climactic imperative of the chapter. Seek first. It is a summons to reorder life. Seek first the reign of God. Make God's justice and presence the priority in choice, giving, prayer, fasting, and thought. Do this and the economy of worry breaks down. Do this and the measures of men no longer have the final word over your worth. Imagine a person hearing this and moving slowly away from the crowd. He is not immediately applauded. He begins in secret. A coin slipped quietly into a hand, a prayer spoken behind a closed door, a fast kept with ordinary countenance. At first, nothing spectacular happens. There is discomfort. Old habits of measuring by eyes and mirrors pull at him. But a subtle thing begins, a light inside his life. He notices gratitude where he had complained. He forgives a neighbor whose offense had seemed unendurable. He sleeps with a lighter chest. This is the transformation Jesus seeks, a change of the inner ledger so that outward actions follow from inward fidelity. The chapter is not a manual for show, but a training ground for the soul. It strips religion of its costume and speaks to what beats beneath the breast. Now consider how this touches you. Do you perform your piety before men? When you post praise for your own generosity in the market of opinion, have you learned to give so that the left hand does not know the right? When you bend to pray, is it to be seen or to be emptied? When you fast, do you fast to be admired or to remember dependence? The test is not external, but internal. What do you want when no one will applaud you? Here the pastoral voice quickens. The Father who sees in secret is not a distant judge keeping score. He is a close parent who delights to meet the honest, contrite heart. There is solace for those worn thin by religious performance. If your life has been driven by the need for applause, there is a way back. Begin where the chapter begins, in secret. Practice a giving nobody knows, a prayer that nobody hears, a fasting that leaves your face ordinary. Let the Father be your audience. A few helpings of practical counsel. Set aside a place and a time to pray that is not public. Cultivate a habit of giving small gifts anonymously. Practice fasting in ways that cultivate compassion rather than proclamation. Relearn the Lord's Prayer as a pattern. Begin by addressing God as Father. Desire His reign. Ask for provision, ask for forgiveness as you offer it, and ask to be kept from the snares that will undo you. These are not techniques for earning favor. They are practices that form the habits of dependence and mercy. There is also a communal correction. If your congregation rewards spectacle, praise, honor, special places for the showy, you must repent corporately. A people that cannot honor secret devotion will build a culture of performance that crushes the weak and honors the proud. Teach children to pray in secret. Model anonymous generosity. Lead by the hidden example, not by the stage. And remember the deeper promise woven through the sermon. Your Father will reward. He sees what the world misses. He is the keeper of accounts that truly matter. The reward is not always immediate comfort. Sometimes it is a transformed character, a new set of desires, a kingdom perspective that holds through trials. Sometimes it is a provision that arrives in a way you did not foresee, a friend arriving with bread, a work that opens, a door you had not imagined. Often, the reward is the slow work of sanctification, a heart made like God's heart. Do not read this as a guarantee that you will never suffer hunger or loss. Jesus lived in a world of real need, but He taught His followers to reframe need against the horizon of God's reign. The command to seek first does not free you from trouble. It frees you from the tyranny of anxiety. It reorders priorities so that even in want, you are not governed by fear. There is also a stark moral implication in the refusal to serve two masters. When wealth becomes an idol, it warps judgment. Decisions bend to profit. Compassion is trimmed to fit the ledger. The call of Matthew 6 is radical. Keep your heart where your treasure is stored. This may require sacrifices, giving up a favored comfort, changing an investment of time or money, refusing to let reputation be the metric by which you live. But the liberty that follows is deep, a life not compelled by the need to acquire, but compelled by the freedom to give and to serve. In the hush of the mountainside, as the crowd dispersed and men spoke in low voices, some followed Jesus and some walked back to the market. The teachings did not produce immediate revolution among all, but for those who listened truly, a new orientation took hold. The Father's presence began to make itself felt in hidden rooms and in softened hearts. So what is the shocking truth you never knew? Perhaps it is that the most consequential religion is invisible. The greatest work of God in your life happens behind walls where no one takes a seat to witness. Your devotion, when stripped of performance, becomes a thing of power, quiet, steady, shaped by the Father who sees and rewards. The revolution Jesus calls for is not a louder public piety, but a deeper private fidelity. It is less show and more root. Tomorrow, when the market hums and when someone praises you for a work you did, pay attention. Ask yourself, did I do this for God or for men? Practice giving without announcement. Pray with the door shut. Fast without changing your face. Let the eye of your heart be clear so your life can be full of light. Begin that secret life today. It will be hard at first. Habit resists. There will be a pulling back to the stage, to applause. But persist. Small acts done in hiddenness have gravity. They begin to reorient a life. The Father who knows what is done in secret sees and will repay in ways that fit His kingdom. Keep that in your heart as you walk from here. Seek first His kingdom. Let this be the axis upon which your days turn. The world will continue to applaud the loud and the costly display. God calls you to a quieter, truer court. There are threads in what we have spoken that must be practiced rather than merely admired. In the next moments of your life, choose one small thing that will be done with no eyes upon it. An anonymous gift, a prayer behind a closed door, a fast observed without herald. Let that seed be sown into the soil of your life and watch how the Father tends it. Begin with a small vow. Decide now to do one thing this week in secret. Not to test God, not to score points with yourself, but to train your heart toward the hidden life. Choose simply a single anonymous gift, a 5-minute prayer each day behind a closed door, a fast from a comfort you would normally announce. Keep no journal to boast about it. Tell no one. Let the deed sit like a stone in still water until rings form and fade. If you do this, you will meet resistance. The first impulse will be to narrate the act to someone who will make it real by praising you. That impulse is not evil in itself. It is the human longing to be seen. But each time you forego the applause, you exercise a muscle that will reconfigure your spiritual posture. The habit of hiddenness teaches the soul to receive from the Father alone. Little by little, the architecture of your inner life changes. Roofs and attics darken as light moves inward to the root. Teach your children to value the invisible. Children learn the rhythms you model. When they see you slip out to pray with the door closed, they notice the seriousness of it without the theatricality. When you give to a neighbor without fanfare, they learn that generosity is a habit, not a performance. Model simple rituals that cultivate secret devotion. A family blessing at bedtime spoken without an audience. A jar where each child drops a small coin for someone they choose to help without saying why. A weekly moment when you turn off screens and read quietly together. These habits build an interior architecture that will hold when the world celebrates what is loud and showy. For congregations, the remedy is structural as well as spiritual. Reward humility in the way you assign leadership, in the way you tell stories from the pulpit, in the posture you take toward public testimony. Public testimony has its place, grace is to be shared, but do not make the platform the only currency of spiritual worth. Put energy into ministries that do their work without notices, that feed the hungry without a press release, that meet needs without public metrics of success. Encourage small groups to practice hiddenness, prayers said for the group's needs in private, anonymous service projects, gifts made through intermediaries. The church that honors secret devotion will cultivate resilience against the intoxicating praise that breaks communities apart. There is also the inner test of motive. When a temptation to perform comes, ask the simple questions Jesus taught by implication. Why am I doing this? For whom? What would happen if no one ever knew? If the honest answer unsettles you, act, change the plan, give away the credit, retreat from the stage. But what about those who are impoverished and know nothing of secret sacrifice because survival leaves little room for quiet piety? We must be careful here. The call to hiddenness is not a luxury for the comfortable. It is a formation for anyone who follows Jesus, and it must be adapted to real need. For the person scraping enough to feed the family, hiddenness may look like a whispered prayer on the way to work, a brief gratitude in the dim morning, a commitment to refuse an opportunistic dishonesty at the expense of short-term gain. For congregations with limited means, hidden devotion might be a shared pot of soup sent anonymously to a neighbor, or time given to a widow without posting it like a victory. The measure is not the scale, but the heart's orientation, toward God's eyes, not toward human applause. Practically, build rhythms that make hiddenness habitual. Here are small, tangible practices you can try. Morning surrender. Before the day's noise begins, spend 5 minutes with the door closed. Speak one simple prayer. Lord, today I seek you, not reward. Keep it short and faithful. Anonymous giving. Once a month, set aside a small sum for a person or family in need. Give it so that no one can connect it to you. Use a note if you must, from one who cares. Secret fasting. Choose a meal to skip, not to impress anyone, but to remind your body that desires can be stewarded. Use the hunger to pray for someone who is hungry. Private confession. Take time weekly to confess to God, not to announce repentance publicly. Let forgiveness be first received and only then, where appropriate, shared. Hidden service. Volunteer for tasks no one notices. The cleanup, the paperwork, the one who arrives early to light the lamps. Do them cheerfully and anonymously when possible. Each discipline is a small wedge slowly prying open the stone of self. Over time, these insertions rearrange priorities. You will find that applause loses its grip. Things that once felt urgent, status, reputation, the neat arrangement of a self-made image, grow dim beside the steady light of God's attention. Expect ambiguity. God's reward is often inscrutable. It may be peace in the middle of trial. It may be a reopened door years later. It may be the quiet reformation of desire so that you prefer the presence of God to the flattering gaze of the crowd. This reward is not always immediate. It seldom fits the ledger we imagine. Yet it is faithful and profound. There is a pastoral danger in speaking of reward, that hearers will turn the sermon into a program for personal benefit. Resist that reduction. The hidden life is not a set of techniques to secure heaven's favors like a vending machine. It is formation, slow work of love that has as its telos the likeness of Christ, not the accrual of goods. Remind the congregation, the aim is holiness, not prosperity, union with God, not profit. Now consider the moral consequences of a life that has been reoriented. When your heart begins to store treasure in heaven, your daily decisions change. You buy different things, spend time differently, weigh invitations differently. You say no more often to petty anxieties about image. You find new courage to forgive because the ledger of wrongs no longer rules you. You become, in small but consistent ways, a person who will not bend justice for comfort. That is the revolution Matthew envisioned, a reconstitution of desire so thorough that even how you spend money and honor is transformed. Leadership bears a heavy responsibility. If you lead a church or group, cultivate hiddenness by your own example. Let your public words be matched by private, sacrificial acts. When you are tempted to seek applause, remind yourself of the teacher on the mountainside who called the Father's secret reward the priceless kind. Appoint leaders for ministries that are notoriously unseen. Care for the marginalized, long-term counsel, grief support, and honor those servants quietly and genuinely. Public recognition is sometimes appropriate, but do not make it a primary currency. Against hypocrisy, be vigilant. Hypocrisy is not merely sin. It is a spiritual pathology that eats at the roots of community. When praise becomes the motivation, the weak are excluded, the proud are exalted. Build cultures of accountability that are corrective, not performative. Small groups that tell truth in love. Mentoring relationships that require vulnerability. Elders who receive complaints with humility and discipline with mercy. When community discipline happens, let it be restorative, aimed at repentance and return to hidden fidelity, not spectacle. The sermon must land in the life, so let us return to the practical. This week, choose one hidden thing. Choose it now. Write nothing about it here. Keep it to your heart. Then tomorrow, when you are tempted to post, to tell, to make public what God already knows, close your mouth. Breathe. Remember the mountainside. Remember the Father who sees in secret. Let his quiet gaze be the aim of your work. Near the end of that day, as dusk softened the market's lines, a woman left her stall a few minutes early. No one noticed when she dropped a small packet of bread at the door of the old man who sat alone by the gate. She walked away with her hands empty and her heart strangely light. Hold that scene in your mind. Let it be a model of the revolution we have described. Small, tender, hidden, yet world-changing in its consequences. Begin there. Begin now. A few weeks after that dusk at the market, the congregation began to show the strange, slow fruit of a different ordering. It did not arrive all at once. Habits do not melt like frost under a single sun, but like snow under a steady warmth, gradual, patient, remaking what was beneath. In the vestry, a young deacon named Elias felt the change in his bones. He had always loved accomplishment. When the church raised money for the new roof, Elias had organized the drives, arranged the tables, stood at the doorway counting gifts. People nodded when he spoke. Some even called him afterward to thank him for his energy. That attention tasted like salt on a wound. He could not imagine giving without someone knowing he had given. Elias came to the elder Miriam one afternoon with a proposal, a public campaign to supply warmth to several families that winter. It was a good idea. The church needed fuel, the families needed blankets and coal. Elias could see the banner already. Bright letters, volunteers in matching vests, a list of donors read from the pulpit. He sought Miriam's approval, but in his heart he also sought the visible ledger that would prove his devotion. Miriam listened without haste. She had led long enough to remember how deeds and pride braided together until neither could be easily separated. She answered not with an immediate plan, but with a question. Why do you want them to know? Elias blinked, surprised. So they'll see it happens. So others will give. So they'll see the church cares. Are those reasons enough? She asked gently. Watch what your reasons make you love. He stammered, then admitted what he felt even to himself. He wanted the reputation of generosity more than he wanted the cost of being generous. Miriam did not scold. She proposed a different course. Let us prepare two efforts, she said. One public, necessary as bread. One hidden, necessary as prayer. The public will supply the blankets. The hidden will be a set of visits, quiet entries to 3 households each week, with food, conversation, help with the stove, left with no tag or list to celebrate. You will lead both, but you will report only the public results at the meeting. The hidden work you will keep secret. You will keep a private ledger for the Lord alone." Elias bristled. He wanted the trophies. But something in Miriam's steady, unshowy gaze called him to a trial. He agreed. It was a small choice, but like every small choice of hiddenness, it sewed a new seam into his soul. The public campaign succeeded in the way public campaigns do. Announcements, a choir singing, cameras angled by well-meaning visitors from a nearby paper. People signed up. The church roof now had more than enough warmth to pass through the season. The banners came down. The applause stung at first, then dulled. People who have long lived by acclaim do not give it up without suffering. Elias experienced humiliation more than once. He had to explain to his friends why there were no pictures of some of his most costly labors. He had to confess to a small, trusted pair that sometimes he still longed for praise. There were nights of praying for deliverance from pride, moments when his old loves rose like weeds. But hiddenness has a way of redirecting longing. When he found himself wanting applause, he learned to breathe and to set a hand against his chest, a physical reminder that there is an audience greater than the town. Teaching hiddenness requires practices, not just platitudes. These are not a checklist for piety, but rhythms that form the heart. Here are a few that took root in the church. Quiet almsgiving. Set aside a sum each month to give anonymously. Do not tally it publicly. If you keep records, keep them in a small book no one sees. Let the Lord be the ledger keeper. Private fasting. Fast without announcement and use the time in silence, not to work harder outwardly, but to attend inwardly. Keep the fast as an offering, not as a badge of zeal. Confession within a circle. Choose 2 or 3 trusted companions with whom to confess struggles and receive prayer. Make it regular. The safety of a small group resists the performance of piety. Hidden benevolence. When you can, leave help in ways that preserve dignity. Repair an old stove in the night. Slip a note of encouragement into a coat pocket. Send a small gift with no return address. Sabbath as sanctuary. Practice a day of withdrawal from productivity and Instagram-like measures of success. Make Sabbath a taste of the secret steadiness you will be given in the quiet. These practices are not merely moral exercises. They are theological. They teach a doctrine of desire, that our affections can be reformed. They train attention away from the public ledger and toward the one who sees in secret. They reorient the soul so that its first questions become, "Does this draw me nearer to God?" rather than, "Does this make me look good?" The elders also encouraged liturgical forms that honored hiddenness. They introduced regular moments in worship where people would write one anonymous note, an offering of regret, a prayer request, a thanks. Fold it and place it in the basket. The pastor would read several of those prayers aloud, not to expose names, but to give voice to the hidden longings and the private confessions of the congregation. The practice was simple and radical. Confession without spectacle, prayer without display. Resistance persisted. Some members, comfortable in the market's glow, left. For them, public recognition had been the church's primary reward. Without it, their loyalty frayed. The elders did not force them. They could not. Hiddenness has no coercive pull. It invites, forms, and sometimes loses those who will not follow. But losses were balanced by surprising returns. One woman who had left years before returned quietly after her husband died. She did not come forward to be noticed. She began to sit in the back rows and to slip envelopes of thanks to the kitchen staff. No one asked who she was. She did not want to be known. What mattered to her was not a place in the parish bulletin, but the steady provision of love in her grief. A teaching moment arrived in the form of a funeral. An old laborer whose life had been ordinary and unseen died, leaving no estate and few friends in the town circles. The family expected a small, unremarked burial. But the church arrived in force, not with banners, but with quiet faces. People who had been touched by the hidden kindness of that man, repairs fixed, beds mended, advice given, stepped forward to carry the coffin and to speak of the ways he had softened their lives. The preacher spoke plainly. He did not seek notice, he served. The rule of God's kingdom calls us to honor such people not by spectacle, but by naming and remembering. The congregation left the grave with acts of generosity in their pockets, transformed by the revelation that the kingdom's heroes are not always those applauded from the platform. The pastoral work, then, is not only to instruct, but to cultivate a church architecture that makes hiddenness possible. That means crafting ministries that are not easily monetized for reputation, commissioning elders who prefer counsel to headlines, and creating forms of service whose measure is fidelity rather than fanfare. It also requires honest preaching, a steady retraining of desire, pointing again and again to the Father who sees. At the heart of the matter lies a paradox. Public worship remains vital. The church must sing, proclaim truth, and celebrate together. Public acts of justice and mercy are essential. Some works demand crowds to raise resources. Others need the public eye to shame injustice. Hiddenness is not a hermit's path away from the world, but a way of tempering public work with private fidelity. The ideal is not the absence of public ministry, but a church whose public face is nourished and corrected by its private life. As winter breathed its cold through the town, the congregation kept practicing its new habits. A young mother, exhausted and near despair, found an envelope of groceries on her stoop. A young man who had once only counted likes, now counted nights he had spent in prayer. Elias, who had once fed on applause, learned to keep a small ledger of secret visits. Sometimes he would find himself scribbling a name in the margin. Helped wood stove, no thanks. The margin held his small triumphs. Miriam continued to teach by example. She did not seek recognition. She cultivated friendships in corners rather than on stages. She counseled elders to lean toward restoration rather than the fierce pleasure of public correction. In private conversations, she reminded them that the work of revival is not flash, but weight. It is accumulation, patience, tenderness. One spring morning, as the first crocuses pressed through the thawing ground, the pastor preached a short sermon on the ancient line from the prophet, "I delight not in sacrifice, but in righteous hearts," and then sat down. He did not demand a particular response. The congregation rose slowly. People left with the lightness that often follows a truth spoken plainly. 2 weeks later, a small, unadvertised team organized to visit a refugee family who had arrived in town with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The team left at dusk with boxes of clothing, an old kettle, and a lamp. They knocked, they set the kettle on the fire, they hung the lamp. No names were recorded. Later, when someone asked Elias why nobody spoke of the visit, he smiled and said, "We had enough company." It was a simple answer, and true. Hiddenness did not make life easy. It did not dissolve envy, eliminate pride, or erase the temptation to convert virtue into currency. But as the congregation practiced it, they developed a resilience against spectacle. They discovered joy in fidelity. They learned to measure success by endurance rather than applause, by the deepening of virtue rather than the expansion of influence. For the reader asked to begin now, the work is concrete. Choose one thing that will be performed in secret this week. It may be an hour of unannounced service, a letter of forgiveness you will not send, a sum given without a receipt, a fast kept without commentary. Make a plan and keep it in the privacy of your chest. If you are in leadership, model it. Take part in the hidden acts and refuse the urge to recount them on any stage. The revolution Matthew envisioned begins always in the concrete. It begins with a bread left at a door. It continues in the small ledger you keep with God, and in the ways you resist applause. It is a slow remapping of desire from center to margin, from the applause of many to the secret gaze of the Father. On a practical level, begin with these 3 steps this week. Pick your hidden act. Inform no one. Schedule it and then pray beforehand for a heart that can receive reward only from the one who sees. Expect ambiguity. Expect resistance. Expect the cunning return of old longings. And, most likely, expect surprises. The quiet lifting of a burden from another's life, the softening of your own, and a tenderness that will not fit in any headline. That is where the sermon ends and the labor begins, not in a dramatic moment of conversion, but in the quiet repetition of small, faithful acts. As people walked back into the market that morning, some with coins and some with coal, the stall-keeper who had once left bread at the gate of the old man noticed something different in how others moved. Less hunger for notice, a softer commerce between neighbors. She folded her hands around the warmth of a mug and, without a thought for any audience, began to plan another small, anonymous mercy for next week. The work continues, small and patient, and it will shape more than roofs and kettles. It will shape desires, communities, and, in ways that cannot be tallied, hearts. The mountain that teaches hiddenness is not a one-time sermon. It is the long landscape of life lived under the gaze of the Father who sees in secret. Keep walking. Winter came with the blunt business of cold. The river swelled and then froze at its edges. The wind found seams in doors no one thought to fasten. The nights grew long enough to teach new kinds of patience. It was in that season, 2 market weeks after the unannounced visit to the refugees, that a spell of storms uncoiled over the town. Branches fell, a cartwheel fractured. Roofs that had held for decades began to betray their age. The complaints that usually rode into the square like stray dogs were quieter this year. People attended to what needed tending, and then they went home. On the 3rd day of rain, the roof of the schoolhouse, the one with the crooked bell, leaked into the smallest corner of the room where the littlest children sat. The teacher, a woman with hands browned by ink and bread, found a soaking patch on the floor and, without ceremonial appeal, laid bowls and empty pots to catch water. She did not speak of repairs to the elders at the gate. She stayed after lessons and, in the gathering dark, she walked to 3 houses she knew kept extra tiles. She wore no lantern, carrying only the sound of children asleep in the school's warm space, and returned wearing the quiet approval of a work done. Elias found himself out with the carpenters before dawn. There was a momentum to the work that did not need explanation. People are good at finding the next thing to fix when the weather demands it. He brought a measure and a little leather book he had begun to treat like a small altar. He recorded the hours, the hands that lifted shingles, the loaves of bread that someone left for the workers on the hearth. The margin of one page held that familiar note. Anonymous? Yes. He felt the tug to tell the story so that the ledger itself might grow a little more honorable, and then checked himself with a memory of Miriam's face in the doorway, the Sunday the pastor had sat down without an ask, steady, unperforming. A boy named Jonas, who hawked sweet barley cakes at the corner near the school, saw Elias early one morning and, with the bluntness of youth, demanded, "Why do you write it down? Why not shout it from the bell tower so everyone knows?" Elias closed the leather book and smiled, the way one might when asked a question that has no bad answer and yet must be answered well. He picked up a shingle and handed it to Jonas. "Because some things shiver when they are displayed," he said. "They lose heat." And because one day, perhaps not for us, but for someone who comes after, we'll need a memory that is not a trumpet. Jonas, still holding the shingle, tasted the sentence as if it were new bread. He went back to his stall and, after the day's sales, slipped a coin without speaking into the palm of an old woman who had come to town in a cloak that could not keep out the rain. He told no one. He discovered that the coin warmed him longer than any flame. Not everyone in the town moved in toward hiddenness without resistance. An argument sparked at the well between two men who had served as foremen for years. One believed that charity must be known, that to be admired is to be trusted, and that records were currency. The other, quieter, held the view that to advertise goodness invites both praise and a change of motive. Their voices rose and fell like weather. Miriam happened upon them carrying a bundle of dry cloth. She neither scolded nor took sides, but invited them both, in the old way, to sit in the shade of the fig tree. There she told them a story of a woman who patched sandals at night and left them at the door of a soldier. And then, when the soldier sought the woman to thank her, found instead that the sandals had already freed the soldier's march. "There are hands that must not be shown," she said. "Otherwise they gain a weight they were not meant to carry." Moved by her simplicity, by how she held no paper nor ledger, only the cloth, the men listened. One of them, who had long kept lists, offered to begin a different practice. For 1 month, he would stop asking for names. If the town survived a few storms without seeking applause for every act, perhaps their motives might settle like stones in a pool. The agreement was hardly dramatic. It was a small reframing, a private compact made in the shade, and it spread the way small good weather does, without thunder. The effect of these private agreements was not immediate transformation. The town did not arise as a choir of perfected hearts. Instead, the change was like the slow settling of flour in a bowl. At first, the mixture is clouded, then it grows clear. Some used hiddenness to obscure misdeeds. Others fell back into the habit of telling in order to be praised. But the practice, once begun, hardened into a habit for many, and habits have the uncanny way of shaping desire. People began to prefer the inward warmth of being known by one reliable eye to the tumult of many eyes. One evening, when the work of mending roofs had dwindled into a smaller labor, cements cured and tiles replaced, Mrs. Hanan, the widow who had once been the first recipient of anonymous bread, left a bundle of knitted mittens on the woodpile of a man who chopped wood in the market at night. She left them there because she had been taught in turn that kindness must be paid forward in the currency of secrecy. The woodchopper found them, and staring at the bundle, felt a fissure inside him that had been there since his wife's illness. He wrapped the mittens in his cloak and went that same night to a doorway where a child had been known to stand shivering. He left them and walked away whistling, as if to forget the remedy before it could be turned into reputation. Miriam watched such small revolutions with the grave delight of one who cultivates a garden and is often unsure whether anything will come of the seeds. Once, when the market was closing, she pulled Elias aside and said, "We will be tempted, all of us, to count our hidden acts and then bury them as trophies in our chests." Elias shook his head. "Then we must be the ones who refuse trophies," he answered. "We must let the chest be empty so there is room for God to put in what he chooses." Miriam laughed then, the sound like a low bell, and said, "And perhaps we must learn to give away empty chests too." Word reached them, softly, not by notice posted on the gate, that another family had come to town, this time from a farther place, bringing a limp bundle and 2 children with hollow cheeks. Miracles large enough to be noticed were not their custom. Miracles small enough to be lived were. A team gathered, an unremarked team, and went, in the blue light before dawn, to hang a pot over the fire, to set out 3 bowls, to leave a rag rug by the door. They did not write their names, because the work had been done for the removal of hunger and not for the ledger of praise. Months passed. The ledger in Elias's hand grew denser in record, but thinner in boast. The margins filled with notes like "repaired threshold, no thanks," and "brought coal, left it back." Other margins carried the opposite notation, "keeps wanting to tell." On the days when pride rose like a bad tide, Elias would turn the ledger closed and walk alone to the river. He would drop a pebble and watch the rings widen and then fade. He kept his ledger not as a way to keep score with men, but as a way to keep memory with God. The leather was a covenant between effort and humility. One bright morning, as the first green pushed through the thaw, the pastor called no congregation into the square. Instead, he sent a note, short and unreadable to any who liked spectacle: "Come to the houses where you can do what you would not otherwise do." People understood. Men and women went out with their small hands and their larger hearts. They painted a fence in the back lane that no one would notice from the road. They replaced a latch on a door that opened only to a garden. They baked a loaf and left it upon a sill where someone would find it and not who had given it. There were moments of temptation, of course. A traveling merchant praised the town for its steadfastness, and half jesting, who among them counted these deeds? He prodded like one who tests iron to see whether it will bend. Elias felt the old hunger flare, an appetite for recognition that had been fed by applause for so long. He moved to speak, then remembered the look Miriam had given him months before, a cool kindness like the surface of a stream. He let the silence keep its weight. The merchant went on his way, and the story of the town remained, as it had chosen to be, mostly unchronicled. What spread more than the acts themselves was the desire they altered. People came to measure their mournings not by what they had shown, but by what they had withheld from boasting. They found that restraint could be a richer thing than applause. Children watched adults leave gifts at doors and were taught in the only way children can be taught, by seeing it happen without fanfare. They learned that goodness need not announce itself to be real. Late one afternoon, as the sun softened, the stall-keeper, the woman who had once folded her hands around a warm mug and planned her next anonymous mercy, sat at her little table and made a list, not of names to be mentioned, but of things she might do before the year ended. She did not pin the list to any board. She tucked it into her apron and, as she closed her stall, slipped a slice of sweet bread into the pocket of a boy who carried the town's empty baskets to the river. He found it when his hands were cold and did not ask the stall-keeper who had left it. He ate it slowly, as if savoring a secret. The revolution Matthew had imagined, if one were to map it at all, looked like a scattering of small lamps carried by people who kept them close to the chest. The lamps did not make a banner of light, but they kept whole corridors from falling into shadow. In beds and by hearths and on porches, the light gathered for those who could not gather otherwise. The town did not make a proclamation, it kept a practice. If you were in that town, if you went down the lane and listened, you would have heard the soft tread of ordinary feet. If you had been there at night, you might have seen through windows hands busy with mending, a kettle steaming, a ledger closed on a table. If you had been close enough to catch the whisper of prayer before an anonymous act, you would have heard people asking not for applause, but for steadiness, not for acknowledgement, but for a heart that endures. And in that slow unrolling of days, hiddenness did what hiddenness does. The town's currency shifted from spectacle to stamina. The standard became fidelity rather than notice. Folks still failed and boasted and slipped, they were not angels. But they had begun to measure their lives against a quieter scale, and in that change there was a certain freedom. One cool morning, Elias opened his leather book to a new page, and, with a light hand, wrote only 3 words in the margin: "For the one." He did not make them a proclamation.